pretty much a very critical bit of what we'll be saying today. If you look at that chart, you will see that when we talk about the classification of the nervous system, we talk about division of the nervous system into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And last week, we explained the central nervous system. We said it's classified into the brain and spinal cord. And they are integrative and control other centers in the body. We also say, in terms of classification of the central nervous system, it could be sub-classified into the brain and the spinal cord. And we sub-classify the brain, sub-classify the spinal cord. We looked at spinal cord last week. Today we look at spinal nerves under peripheral nervous system. So when we talk about the peripheral nervous system, basically, we are talking about the cranial nerves, the subcranial nerves, and we're also talking about the spinal nerves. But again, we can also discuss the peripheral nervous system in terms of whether it's sensory, whether it's motor, whether it is mixed. And if you are talking about the motor components of the peripheral nervous system, we can also sub-classify it into the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is voluntary. Many of the nerves control to voluntary muscles. And when we talk about voluntary muscles, your biceps, your triceps, your latissimus dorsi, your vastus lateralis, your gluteus maximus. These are voluntary muscles. Involuntary muscles are muscles of your viscera, your muscles of the gastrointestinal tract, muscles of muscle layer of the stomach, the muscle lining of the duodenum, the jejunum, the ileum, the muscle layers of other, visceral structures like the uterus, like the spleen, like the liver. Those ones, the way they work, they are involuntary. They are autonomous. They are not under the control of the will. That's what we mean by that. So when we talk about autonomic nervous system also, we can still sub-classify it into the sympathetic nervous division and the parasympathetic division. Of course, you do know that the sympathetic division gets the body ready for fight and flight activities, either to run away from something that is confronting you or to confront it, to face it squarely. So it is the autonomic nervous system that modulates that behavior. But when we talk about parasympathetic nervous system, they tend to limit or hinder the continuation of the activity of the sympathetic nervous system. For example, in that room, wherever you are at this point in time, you have your phone, or you have your laptop with you, and just as you are listening to Professor Adejumo, a huge snake just fell from the ceiling or from the tree or wherever you are, and you can see the snake crawling towards your side. Do you wait there? No. There's something in you that will pour adrenaline into your bloodstream. And the adrenaline in your bloodstream, if possible, will only make you to take your phone or your laptop. You'll forget your shoe and your towel or whatever is around you there, and you run for your dear life. Okay? What prepares you to do so much running and to just jump out to hurt? It's essentially the autonomic nervous system, but specifically the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system will want to preserve in terms of making you get away from sort of danger or to make you to confront danger. But at times, when you now realize that What even fell from the ceiling and what came around you was a plastic snake. It's not a live snake. Or the gun that your roommate pulled, around you. I'm not saying anybody should pull gun around you. And you realize a toy gun. Oh, you say, oh, what is wrong with you, boy, now? Stop doing like this guy. And as you are cooling down, it is the parasympathetic that is nullifying the activity of the sympathetic so that you are not under siege for too long, so that you are not perpetually, under the desire to attack. So that is about but again, you can, as I said, you can classify the central nervous system into the brain and the spinal cord. But when it comes to peripheral nervous system, we talk about cranial nerves, we talk about spinal nerves. And when we talk about these spinal nerve or cranial nerve, they are either sensory, motor, or mixed. When we say sensory, it also means afferent. Afferent means brings in information from sense organs. And when I say sense organs, I mean your organs of sensation and perception. And that includes information from your eyes, information from your tongue, information from your nostrils, information from your ears, information from your skin. That information will pass from the exterior through the sensory component of the peripheral nerve to the central nervous system. And when the information gets to the central nervous system can still not directly control the activity of the part of the body that should respond to the impact of the stimulation. What the central nervous system will do will be to send an efferent response, which many times will be motor response, that will bring information to the part of the body that should respond to the information that came from the sense organs through the PNS to the CNS. And when we now talk about the motor component of the peripheral nervous system, it is either we are talking about somatic or we are talking about autonomic. Somatic or autonomic. These are the subdivisions of the motor component of the peripheral nervous system. So the somatic will be motor response to skeletal muscles. Okay? And when we say skeletal muscles, I gave you examples a moment ago. From your face to your tongue, to your cheeks, to your anterior abdominal wall, to your gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, to your levator ani, to coccygis muscle, to vastus lateralis, vastus medialis. These are muscles. These are names of muscles. Gastrocnemius muscle. These are muscles that you should also learn about later. Okay, so that's for somatic. That is skeletal muscles. But the autonomic components, they are involuntary. They control activities of the heart. They control other activities of smooth muscles and glands. And where do we have smooth muscles? In the lungs, in the heart, in the gastrointestinal tract, in the gallbladder, in the liver, also even in the urinary bladder. These are places where you have smooth muscles. But apart from that, even glands like the skin, okay? So the activity of that involuntary motor response could either be parasympathetic or sympathetic. Sympathetic forms many of those activities in those organs to speed up, okay, to contract for action. Whereas when the action is done, many times very shortly, the parasympathetic division takes over to extinguish the stimulation, the control that was sent all the way from the CNS to the effector organ. Okay. Having laid that background, we need to remember that the peripheral nervous system means all of the nervous tissue outside the brain and the spinal cord. That means every bit of what we have that's excluded from the brain and spinal cord, they constitute what we know as the peripheral nervous system. That is the PNS. And it includes the cranial nerves. And when we say the cranial nerves, we mean the 12 cranial nerves apart from the optic nerve. But we'll still talk about that as we move. The spinal nerves and the autonomic nervous system, they are all part of the they are all part of the they are all part of the autonomic nervous system. Now, the peripheral nervous system encompasses those neurons that connect the central nervous system to the receptors, muscles, organs at the periphery of the body. So the PNS, has within it neurons that connect the CNS to the receptors, that connect the CNS to the muscles, and connect the CNS to organs at the periphery of the body. When we say periphery, away from the central axis, that's what we mean, by the periphery. So most of the nerves of the PNS, when I say PNS, I mean peripheral nervous system. Most of the nerves of the PNS are made up of sensory nerve fibers conveying afferent impulses from sensory end organs to the brain. So like this means, like your leg now, your fingers now, there are nerve fibers there that bring in information. Maybe you are suddenly carried a hot spot. The information will come from your fingers into your spinal cord, into your brain, and the brain will send information. The information that goes in is afferent impulse, afferent information, sensory information. Okay? And when it gets to the brain sends the information to the part of the brain that is responsible for giving the most precise response, sensory response to that afferent information. So the brain sends an efferent response. Efferent response means the motor response. That means response to the part of the body that should give a feedback, that should respond for the person to be kept alive or to have physiological and psychological homeostasis. So when we talk about the peripheral nervous system, we are talking about three main parts. We are talking about spinal nerves, we are talking about cranial nerves, and we are talking about the autonomic part of the nervous system. So that's one of the reasons why we don't dwell so heavily on the somatic nervous system. That's why when we're talking about the peripheral nervous system, we'll be talking about just spinal nerves, just cranial nerves, and the autonomic part of the nervous system that is concentrating on the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So let's begin with the first one, which is the spinal nerves. They are named according to the vertebrae with which they are associated. When you look at your spine, there are bones at the back. We call them backbones. Bones around the neck, bones around the chest, bones around the abdomen, bones around the waist, and bones on your tail. So you have the first one there that is towards the head as cervical. Either cervical. The one that is towards the chest is known as the thoracic. Thoracic. The one that is beneath the thoracic is the lumbar vertebrae. And from lumbar vertebrae, you have lumbar nerves. From thoracic cage or thoracic vertebrae, you have thoracic nerves. From cervical vertebrae, you have cervical nerves. Because they are direct bifurcation from each of those bony cages that I have talked about. So apart from the lumbar nerves, you also have the sacral nerves from the sacral bone. And after the sacral nerve, from the sacral bone, you now have the coccygeal. coccygeal from coccygeal bone. That's the human tail.